The flowers were white lilies. I remember that because I'd spent 4 months choosing them, 4 months comparing shades of ivory and cream like the difference mattered, like the right petal could hold a marriage together. It couldn't. The cathedral was full, 216 guests. I'd counted them myself during the seating chart revision, assigned every name to a chair, folded every napkin into a swan, because my mother said, swans mate for life, and it was a good omen. My father walked me down the aisle at exactly 4 p.m. Pachelbel's cannon swelled through the speakers, the late afternoon sun cutting through stained glass and painting everything gold. I floated. I was 27 years old, and I was untouchable. David stood at the altar in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one I'd helped him pick. His groomsmen flanked him in a neat row. His mother sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she'd probably ironed that morning. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, but David's smile wasn't right. I saw it the moment I reached him. My father placed my hand in his, and David took it, but his fingers didn't tighten. They just held, like he was carrying something he was about to set down. I told myself it was nerves. The officiant opened with a reading from Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind. David stared somewhere past my left ear. I squeezed his hand. He didn't squeeze back. I. Do you, David Martin Ashford, take this woman? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The officiant smiled politely, waited. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone in the third row let out a small, uncomfortable laugh, the kind people make when they don't know what's happening yet, but their body does. 3 seconds passed. 5, 8. David closed his mouth, swallowed, looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that entire day, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't love, it wasn't fear, it was decision. The kind that's already been made long before the moment arrives. I'm sorry, he said. He said it quietly, almost gently. The way you tell a child something you know they're too young to understand. Then he stepped back, 1 step, 2, released my hand like smoke, leaving an open window. I can't do this. He turned and walked down the aisle. Not running, not dramatic, just leaving. Steady footsteps on marble. His best man called his name once. David didn't stop. He pushed through the cathedral doors, and the daylight swallowed him whole. For 3 full seconds, no one breathed. My brain clung to numbers the way drowning people cling to wreckage. Counting was easier than feeling. Then someone exhaled. Then the sound came. Not gasps, something worse. Whispers. A tide of them, rolling through the pews like wind through dry grass. I heard chairs creak, fabric rustle, and then the phones rose. 1, 2, 6. A dozen screens blinking to life, little glass eyes turning toward me like I was something to be captured. I stood at that altar in a $12,000 dress, with my bouquet still in my hands, and my veil pinned so tight it pulled at my temples, and I could not move. My legs wouldn't unlock. Shock loosened slowly. My mouth wouldn't open. I just stood there, while the cathedral filled with the soft, devastating hum of people recording the worst moment of my life. My maid of honor reached for me. I didn't feel her hand, because I was looking at the back of the room. A man stood near the last pew, black suit, still as stone. His arms rested at his sides, and he watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Not pity, not curiosity, not amusement. Just attention. Absolute, undivided attention. He didn't move, didn't whisper, didn't reach for a phone. He just watched, and something in my chest beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation shifted. I was already moving before I realized my legs had unlocked. My heels cracked against the marble like gunshots. The train of my dress tangled around my ankles, and I yanked it sideways, not caring that I heard something rip. I wasn't thinking about the dress. I wasn't thinking about 200 faces watching me sprint down a church aisle like a woman set on fire. I was thinking about David's back disappearing through those doors and the way his voice had sounded when he said sorry like a man reciting a line he'd rehearsed in his bathroom mirror that morning. I made it 6 steps before a hand caught my arm. Not grabbed, caught. The way you'd catch a glass, sliding off a countertop firm, precise, without apology. My body jerked to a stop, and I spun, ready to scream, ready to claw, and then froze, because something in his stillness short-circuited the panic, and found myself staring up into a face I'd never seen before in my life. The man from the back pew, black suit, no phone, dark eyes that didn't widen when mine met them. Korean, sharp jaw, mid-30s maybe. A thin scar bisected his left eyebrow like a sentence someone had started and never finished close enough that I could see the pores in his skin. He held my arm just above the elbow, and his grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute, the kind of hold that communicated, without language, that he had made a decision, and the decision was final. Let go of me. My voice came out shattered. I barely recognized it. He didn't let go. He didn't flinch. He looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a wound, with complete attention and zero sentiment. Don't chase a man who already chose to leave. 6 words. His voice was low, unhurried, accented just enough to sharpen the consonants. He said it like fact, like gravity, like he was informing me that the sun was hot and the floor was beneath my feet. "Who are you?" I whispered. He released my arm, not suddenly, slowly, like he was making sure I wouldn't bolt. Then he straightened his cuffs. One, then the other, and without answering, he turned away from me and faced the cathedral. 216 people stared back at him. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The officiant stood at the altar with his Bible still open, his mouth slightly parted. My mother had half risen from her seat, one hand pressed to her chest. My maid of honor, Catalina, stood frozen mid-reach, her finger still curled where my shoulder had been a moment ago. And this man, this stranger whose name I did not know and whose hand had just stopped me from making the worst decision of the afternoon, walked forward, toward the altar, toward the silence, toward the wreckage. He stepped into that space where no one else would go. He moved like weather. That's the only way I can explain it. The way a storm front rolls across a flat plain, unhurried, indifferent, inevitable. His footsteps were even, his shoulders were level. He didn't look left or right. He didn't acknowledge the phones still glowing in trembling hands. He walked up that aisle as though it had been built for him, and every person he passed shifted, not dramatically, not consciously, but the way the body shifts when it registers a frequency too low to hear. An older woman in lavender pulled her purse closer. A groomsman near the front took one step back, then another, then seemed confused about why he'd moved at all. Even the light felt different, colder somehow, sharper, as though the stained glass had changed its mind about which colors to let through. He reached the altar and stopped. The officiant looked at him the way a rabbit looks at headlights. "The ceremony," the man said, "is finished." Not a request, not a suggestion, a geological event, something that had already happened and was simply being narrated after the fact. The officiant closed his Bible. I don't think he decided to. I think his hands just did it, the way hands sometimes know what the brain hasn't caught up to yet. And then the doors opened. David came back. Panic has a short half-life. He came back the way cowards come back, loud, flushed, overcompensating. The cathedral doors banged against the walls, and his voice arrived before his body did, booming and cracked, too loud for the space, ricocheting where whispers had lived seconds ago, careening off the stone like a man who'd just realized the story had continued without him, and he didn't like the new direction. What the hell is going on? Who is this? Eliana? Eliana? Come here. This is still my. This is our. He stopped, because the man in black had turned around. There was no anger on that face, No threat, no clenched jaw or balled fist or any of the telegraphed warnings men use when they want to seem dangerous. There was something much worse. Certainty. The kind that doesn't need volume. The kind that sits behind the eyes like a locked door and says, very simply, I know exactly what I'm willing to do, and you don't. You chose, the man said, quiet, almost gentle, 5 minutes ago, in front of everyone. You chose. David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Go home. 2 words, and they landed like a verdict. David looked past him, looked at me wild-eyed, sweating, his Tom Ford jacket hanging open like he'd been running, and I saw him calculate something in real time. I saw him weigh the man's posture, his stillness, the absolute zero of his expression, and arrive at a number that frightened him. David left. He left the way people leave burning buildings fast, graceless, without looking back. The cathedral doors swung shut behind him, and the sound they made echoed for a long time, bouncing between the walls like a final heartbeat. I stood in the aisle in my torn dress and my loosening veil and realized, with a strange, floating calm, that I was no longer unprotected. He didn't come to me. He let me come to him. That mattered. I wouldn't understand how much until later, but in that moment, standing in the wreckage of a ceremony that had decomposed in less than 4 minutes, the fact that he waited, that he stood at that altar with his hands at his sides and didn't approach me, didn't reach for me, didn't fill the silence with reassurance or explanation was the first thing he ever gave me. Choice. You don't have to stay here, he said. Not softly, not loudly, at exactly the volume the sentence required, and not a decibel more. I looked at the pews, at my mother, weeping, at my father, gray-faced, gripping the back of a chair like the floor had shifted, at Catalina, who was crying but also furious, her mascara running in 2 clean lines, like war paint, at aunts and uncles and cousins and college friends, and David's business partners, and the florist who was standing near the back with her hands pressed to her mouth. 216 witnesses, every single one of them looking at me, every single one of them holding a phone. I was already everywhere. I could feel it. The uploads happening in real time, the captions being typed, the group chats detonating. By tonight, I would be a clip. By tomorrow, a meme. By next week, the punchline to a story strangers told at dinner parties. The bride, who got walked out on. The woman, left standing. The dress, the lilies, the frozen face. I looked at the man. I don't know who you are. No, he agreed. You don't. This could be worse than what just happened. It could. You're not going to tell me it won't be. No, I exhaled. It came out shaky and raw and tasted like copper. He extended his hand, palm up, open, not a demand, not a rescue, an offer, the most terrifying kind, the kind where the person holding the door doesn't promise what's on the other side. Staying meant being archived. Leaving meant being unknown. I took it. Not because I trusted him, not because I believed him, because staying meant becoming a monument to the worst 5 minutes of my life. And I'd rather walk into the unknown than stand still inside a ruin. His fingers closed around mine, warm, dry, steady. We walked down the aisle together. Not fast, not slow. Through the silence, through the stairs, through the clicking of camera shutters that sounded like insects. My father called my name once Eliana, and his voice broke on the 3rd syllable, and I almost stopped. Almost. The cathedral doors opened onto late afternoon light that was too bright, too golden, too beautiful for what was happening. A black sedan waited at the curb. Not a limousine that was parked further up, white and ribboned, grotesque now. A sedan, dark windows, engine already running. He opened the rear door. I gathered my dress in both hands, ducked inside, and slid across leather that smelled like cedar wood. He got in beside me. The door closed, and behind the tinted glass, the cathedral, the crowd, the cameras, the lilies, the ruins, All of it shrank and blurred, and finally, mercifully, disappeared. The city moved past the windows like a dream someone else was having. I don't know how long we drove. 10 minutes. An hour. Time had come unmoored, and I was floating inside it, still wearing the dress, still wearing the veil. It had slipped sideways and hung over my left shoulder like a dead thing I hadn't thought to remove. My bouquet was gone. I dropped it somewhere between the altar and the car, and I hadn't noticed. $12,000 of white lilies, scattered across marble, and I couldn't remember opening my hands. Letting go had already started. The man sat beside me without touching me. His posture was relaxed, but precise, the way a blade rests inside a sheath. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't make calls. He watched the road with the same quiet attention he'd given me at the altar, and his silence wasn't awkward or expectant. It was structural, load-bearing, the kind of silence that holds a room together instead of emptying it. "Where are you taking me?" My voice sounded like it belonged to someone sitting 3 seats away. "Somewhere you can breathe." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. I turned to look at him fully. The scar, through his eyebrow, caught the shifting light from the windows. Up close, his features were severe high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it smiled rarely and meant it when it did. His hands rested on his thighs. No rings, no watch, nothing that glittered or announced itself. I need more than that. "You will have it." Not yet. The car turned off the main road and descended into an underground parking structure, the kind that requires a key card at 2 separate checkpoints. The driver I hadn't even registered there was a driver didn't speak. The gates opened and closed behind us, with a sound like sealed chambers pressurizing. We stopped. The man got out first, then offered his hand again. Same gesture, same open palm. I took it because my legs were shaking, and the heels I'd chosen, because they made my calves look elegant in photographs, were now instruments of slow torture. An elevator, private, no buttons visible, only a biometric panel that he pressed his thumb against without breaking stride. The doors closed, and we rose. I counted floors by the sensation in my stomach. 12, 15, 20. The doors opened onto a hallway that was wide, hushed, and lit in a way that made the walls seem to glow from within. A woman, in a dark blazer, stood waiting. She was perhaps 50, silver-haired, and her expression when she saw me wasn't surprise or curiosity, it was preparedness. She'd been told I was coming before I knew I was coming. "Miss Voss," she said, and the fact that she knew my name should have alarmed me, but instead, it just confirmed what I'd already suspected. Nothing about this was accidental. "This way, please." She led me down the hall and into a suite that was larger than my apartment. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline I recognized, but had never seen from this height. On the bed, a massive, low-framed thing dressed in white linen, someone had laid out clothes. Simple, expensive, my size. "Take whatever time you need," the woman said. "There's water on the table. Food will be brought if you'd like. The door locks from the inside." She left. I stood alone in that enormous room with the city glittering below me and the silence pressing against my skin like warm water. And for the first time since David had said, "I can't do this," I felt the ground beneath my feet. I sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled the veil from my hair, pin by pin, and each one felt like removing a small, sharp lie. I set them on the nightstand in a neat row. I unlaced my shoes. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and breathed, really breathed, and the sound of it filled the room like a confession. I was safe. I didn't know why. I didn't know for how long. But in that moment, safety felt real in a way it hadn't in years, maybe ever. And the weight of that realization bent me forward until my forehead touched my knees, and I stayed there, folded in half, breathing, not crying, just breathing, until the city lights outside the window softened from gold to amber to a deep, merciful blue. I woke to the sound of nothing. No alarm, no traffic through thin walls, No muffled neighbors arguing about the electric bill. Just a vast velvet silence and the pale gray light of early morning spilling through windows that stretched higher than any window had a right to. For 3 full seconds I didn't know where I was, and those 3 seconds were the most peaceful I'd felt in a year. Then memory returned, a freight train hitting a glass house, and I sat up in sheets that weren't mine, wearing clothes I hadn't bought, inside a building I couldn't name, and the day before came flooding back in high definition. The lilies, the vows, the pause, David's back disappearing through cathedral doors, and the man. I found him in a dining room I hadn't known existed, separated from the main living space by a wall of frosted glass that filtered the morning light into something soft and borderless. He sat at a table set for 2, a cup of black coffee in front of him, reading something on a tablet. When I entered, he looked up, put the tablet face down, waited. I sat across from him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was food, fruit, toast, something with eggs that smelled like thyme, and I ate because my body demanded it, not because I tasted anything. He ate too, slowly, precisely. His movements had the same quality as his silence, intentional, unperformative, stripped of anything that didn't serve a function. After the plates were cleared by hands I never saw, the staff here moved like ghosts. I set my palms flat on the table and said the only thing that mattered: tell me the truth. He studied me, not the way David used to study me, scanning for mood, calculating which version of himself to deploy. This was different. This was a man looking at me to determine whether I was strong enough to carry what he was about to hand me. He decided, visibly, that I had earned it. My name is Sojin Kang. He said it simply, without weight or ceremony. The name settled between us, like a stone dropped into still water. I operate in spaces most people pretend don't exist. Logistics, leverage, the machinery that runs beneath the machinery you see. Some of what I do is legal. Much of it exists in territories where legality is a matter of perspective. I am not a good man, by any standard definition, Eliana. I am a useful one. He paused. Not for dramatic effect, because he was giving me time to leave. I didn't. I was at your wedding because I have business with David Ashford's father. I had no intention of intervening. I intended to sit, observe, and leave. But I watched that man walk out on you, and I watched you stand there, and I saw something I recognized. What? A person about to be defined by someone else's cowardice. The sentence hit me in the sternum. I felt it crack something open, not a wound, something harder. A casing, a shell I'd been building for years without knowing I was building it. I can arrange your return. Within the hour, if you want. A car, a clean story, a lawyer who can begin annulment proceedings before David's family can get their version into the press. I can make this disappear as cleanly as anything disappears in the age of cameras. He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough. Or you can stay. Not because I want you to. Not because there's an arrangement or an expectation or a debt. Because sometimes the safest place to rebuild is somewhere no one knows how to find you. And what do you get? The question came out sharper than I intended. He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved by a millimeter, and even that tiny gesture transformed his face, made the severity crack just enough to reveal something underneath. Something human and weary, and possibly even kind. Nothing, he said. I don't transact in people. I believed him. I had no reason to believe him. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to call a cab and run. But underneath the screaming, in that quiet place where intuition lives, something said, "This man just told you exactly who he is and did not flinch." How many people in your life have done that? "I'll stay," I said, temporarily, on my terms. He nodded once, just once, as if any other answer would have disappointed him. The world didn't wait for me to grieve. It feasted. By noon the first day, 3 videos had gone viral. By evening, my name was a hashtag, number alter abandon, trended for 48 hours. Alongside cruel variants I refused to learn. Someone had captured the exact moment David's hand released mine, and it had been looped into a GIF that I would later learn was viewed 11 million times. Commenters dissected my expression, frame by frame. They analyzed my dress. They mocked my bouquet. They wrote fan fiction about the man in black who'd walked me out, and within a week, a conspiracy theory emerged that the whole thing had been staged for publicity. I watched none of it. Seojin made sure of that. Not by confiscating my phone or controlling my access that would have been a cage, and I'd already lived in one of those. He simply ensured that the noise couldn't reach me unless I chose to open the door. The suite had no television. Wi-Fi required a code I could request at any time, but never needed to. Information arrived filtered through the silver-haired woman, whose name, I learned, was Miss Park, and she delivered it with the clinical efficiency of a doctor reading lab results. The headlines, the legal notices, the voicemails from David that arrived in escalating tones of outrage, remorse, and threat, sometimes all 3 within a single message. "He's contacted you 14 times today, Miss Park," reported on day 3, her voice carrying all the emotional weight of a weather forecast. "His attorney has sent a formal request for your location. Mr. Kang's legal team has responded." What did they say? No, that was it. No was a complete sentence in this building. No was a wall, a moat, a locked gate. I was beginning to understand that protection, real protection, didn't look like muscles and threats. It looked like infrastructure. It looked like a system designed so that the people who wanted to reach you simply couldn't, not because they were afraid, but because the architecture made it impossible. David's father tried next, Charles Ashford, who ran a real estate development firm that had been quietly hemorrhaging money for 2 years, a fact I hadn't known during the engagement, a fact Seojin mentioned casually over dinner on day 4, as though he were commenting on the weather. "You didn't know," he said. Not a question. No. David's proposal coincided with his father's need for a merger. Your family's construction firm was the target. The wedding was a handshake. I set down my fork. The salmon I'd been eating turned to chalk in my mouth. He married me for a business deal. He tried to. He failed. The fact should have devastated me. Instead, it clarified something, a blurry shape I'd been staring at for months, maybe years. The way David's affection had always felt like a performance. The way his family had been too welcoming, too eager, too interested in my father's company during dinner conversations that I'd mistaken for politeness. I wasn't heartbroken. I was furious. And fury, it turned out, was something I could work with. The days took on a rhythm. Morning coffee in the frosted glass dining room. Conversations that started factual and gradually, without either of us acknowledging it, became personal. Seojin spoke sparingly but never carelessly. Every sentence carried exactly the information it intended to carry. Nothing more, nothing less. And there was something almost intoxicating about a person who treated language with that kind of precision. I began noticing things I shouldn't have noticed. The way he held a pen low between the second and third finger, like a calligrapher. The way he stood at the window in the evenings and watched the city with an expression that wasn't longing or satisfaction, but something in between. Something that looked like a man who had built his kingdom and then discovered he had no one to show it to. I pushed the feeling down, buried it beneath practicality and self-preservation, and the very reasonable argument that a woman who had been publicly abandoned 4 days ago should not, under any circumstances, be developing feelings for the criminal who rescued her. But the feeling didn't stay down. It sat in my chest like a low, steady hum, and every time Seojin looked at me, really looked, with that surgical attention that stripped everything away, Except what was true, the hum got louder. On day 7, I reached for the salt at the same moment he did, and our fingers touched, and neither of us pulled away for exactly 2 seconds too long. We didn't mention it. We didn't need to. The air in the room had changed temperature, and we both felt it, and the fact that we both chose to keep sitting there, in the warmth of it, said more than any conversation could have. Trust, I was learning, doesn't begin where fear ends. It begins in the exact space where fear should have ended it, and you stay anyway. The first threat arrived on day 11. The first visible one. Not from David, not from the press, from a name I didn't recognize, delivered in a manila envelope that Miss Park brought to me with an expression that was, for the first time since I'd met her, unsettled. Inside, a photograph of me entering the building, taken from across the street, shot with a long lens. The quality was professional. On the back, written in neat block letters, "She should not be here." Seo Jin saw the photograph. He didn't react visibly. His face remained the same landscape of controlled stillness. It always was. But something shifted behind his eyes. A gear engaged. A calculation completed. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls in rapid Korean, his voice low and measured, and by the time he set the phone down, the building's security had doubled. "Who sent this?" "Someone inside my organization," he said. And then, because he had promised honesty, "There are people who believe my attention has been compromised, that your presence here is a vulnerability." Is it? He looked at me for a long moment. Yes. The word hung between us. Not an accusation, a confession. My world operates on a set of principles that don't accommodate personal attachments. Alliances? Yes. Transactions? Yes. But care, genuine, unstructured care for another person, is a liability. It creates leverage. It provides your enemies with a target they know you'll move to protect. Then I should leave. Leaving won't make you safer. He said it flatly, the way he stated all facts. You've been photographed entering. Your connection to me is now documented. If you walk out that door, you become an unprotected target with a known association. Here, you're defended. Out there, you're a loose thread. The mathematics of danger. I was beginning to understand his language. Not Korean, not English, but the third dialect he spoke fluently: risk. Every sentence was an equation. Every decision was a probability matrix. And somewhere inside that matrix, in a column he probably wished didn't exist, was me. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to listen," without reassurance. I nodded. The world I've built runs on a balance of debts. People owe me. I owe people. These debts are honored not because of trust, but because the cost of breaking them is greater than the cost of keeping them. It is a system held together by consequence, not loyalty. There are men who would dismantle everything I've built if they believed I had a weakness. And there are men within my own structure who would hand them the tools to do it. He paused. Let the weight settle. If you stay, you become part of that structure, not as a prisoner, not as a decoration, as a known element. People will watch you. People will test you. And there will be moments I can't predict when, where the danger will not be theoretical. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to choose informed. The first time you took my hand, you were running. I don't want you to stay, because you're running. I want you to stay because you've looked at what's here and decided it's worth the cost. I thought about the cathedral, about the lilies and the vows and the man who'd walked away because he'd never had the courage to walk toward me honestly in the first place. I thought about my father's voice breaking on my name, about the GIF playing on 11 million screens, about the life I'd had before, comfortable, curated, hollow. And I thought about this apartment in the sky, this man who told me who he was without editing the dangerous parts, this strange, impossible safety that existed inside the most unsafe thing I'd ever done. I'm staying, I said. Not because I'm running, because I'm done being the woman things happen to. Seojin nodded, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't control or calculation or warning. It was relief. Months passed like weather, changing slowly at first, then all at once. I learned the architecture of his world, the way you learn a language, by immersion. The meetings that happened in rooms I was never explicitly excluded from, but also never explicitly invited to, until one morning I simply sat down at the table and no one asked me to leave. The phone calls in Korean that I began, without instruction, to understand in fragments, not the words, but the cadence. The way his voice dropped half a register when he was issuing a directive versus receiving information. The way silence on the other end of the line meant compliance. I learned to read people the way Seojin read them, not by what they said, but by where their weight shifted, by which hand they used to reach for a glass, by whether they looked at him first or me. They started looking at you, Miss Park observed one morning, with something that might have been approval. She was right. The men who came and went, from the building investors, intermediaries, the well-dressed machinery of an empire that operated just beneath the surface of legitimate commerce, had begun addressing me. Not with deference, not with the performative politeness men deployed toward women they considered decorative, with attention. The kind you give to something you've been warned not to underestimate. I hadn't demanded it. I'd earned it by staying, by listening, by proving in 100 small moments that I could hold a silence without flinching and look a dangerous man in the eye without blinking and absorb information without leaking it. Seojin never asked me to be any of those things. He simply made space for them to emerge. And that more than the apartment, more than the security, more than the 1,000 invisible systems he'd built around me, was the thing that changed me. He didn't rescue me. He cleared the wreckage and let me see what I was made of. Love arrived the way dawn arrives, not as a single moment of light, but as a gradual, irrefutable brightening that makes it impossible to remember exactly when it got this bright. It was in the dinners that stretched longer each week, the conversations that moved from strategy to philosophy to memory. The night he told me about his mother, a woman who had cleaned offices in Seoul and raised 3 sons alone, and died before she could see what the youngest had built with his bare hands, and his voice didn't crack, but his jaw tightened in a way I'd come to recognize as the place where his grief lived. It was in the morning I found him reading a book in Korean, and he looked up, and the expression on his face, unguarded, soft. A man caught in the middle of being human, cracked something in my chest that I'd thought was permanently sealed. It was in the night I knocked on his door at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, and he opened it immediately, fully dressed, as though he'd been waiting. And we stood in the hallway and said nothing for a full minute, and then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, and his fingers lingered on my cheekbone, and the entire building seemed to hold its breath. We didn't rush. There was nothing to rush toward. The old rituals, the proposals, the ceremonies, the performances belonged to a world we'd both outgrown. What grew between us didn't need an audience. It needed only the truth, repeated daily in small and steady acts of staying. He asked me on a Tuesday, not at dinner, not in a moment of crisis. In the kitchen at 7 a.m., while I was making coffee and he was reading the news, and the light through the window was gray and ordinary and perfect. Eliana. I looked up. He wasn't kneeling. He was standing, the way he always stood, straight, balanced, present. He held nothing in his hands. No ring, no box, no performance. He knew what he was refusing. "I'm not offering you a wedding," he said. "I'm offering you a life. Mine. With all of its weight. With all of its cost. With the understanding that I have been many things to many people, but I have never been someone's partner, and I want to be yours." No cameras, no cathedral, no audience. Just a man standing in a kitchen, asking a woman who'd already seen the worst of him and the best of him, and everything in between, to choose him not in a moment of spectacle, but in the most ordinary moment imaginable. Yes, I said, not because he'd saved me, not because I owed him, not because the world outside was cruel and he was strong, because I'd walked through fire and come out the other side and found someone standing there who hadn't tried to put it out or tell me what the burns meant. He just handed me water and waited to see what I'd build next. And this quiet, unperformative, terrifying, honest thing was it. The real marriage began where the first one ended. Not with vows, but with a choice. Not in front of the world, but inside it. Not at an altar, but in the kitchen, in the morning, in the gray light, with coffee brewing and the city waking and no one watching except us. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.